beautiful people. I did not make a video in a while, so I thought it's about time to give you something new, to give you something practical. Now, speaking about the self-realization process, the spiritual process, the thing that gets us actually closer to where we are truly to be found, so to speak, is of course the uncomfortable work here. It is the shadow work, it is the digging up of dark energies in the body, old memories, regrets, shames, judgments, angers, traumas, frustrations, all of that. Well, I do understand that some of you might not feel confident enough to do so. Even all of you can do it if you should choose it. You will figure it out that if you really get to it, that you're perfectly capable of transmuting, transforming those type of energies in your system. So often what those who serve as a spiritual catalyst do, they try to get you to actually be convinced to finally start doing the shadow work, you see. It's all nice speaking about yoga, it's all nice speaking about meditation and so on, but transformation is about embracing the inner darkness, because ultimately it's not dark. Ultimately it is hidden light. Now, to get to it, there are very straight ways of doing so. Now, we need to make a distinction between traumas that you're conscious of and traumas that you're not conscious of. There's plenty of trauma you're not conscious of and you can't consciously access yet if your meditation practice is not deep enough. But there are probably certain things in your current life that bother you, that you react to, where you create a lot of emotion, based on the trigger. Of course, that trigger is not happening because of what happens in life, but because of your belief about what happens in life. So your beliefs make you suffer. It's not your life situation, it's always your beliefs about it. So in that sense, we want to figure out what are those negative beliefs that we have, what are those prejudices that we have that create those emotions. Because what are negative emotions? A negative emotion is actually nothing negative at all. A negative emotion is something that tells you your belief is currently out of alignment with truth. If you would be aligned with truth, you would not experience negativity. So when you experience any type of negativity, emotionally speaking, it is because what you believe about what is at that moment is untrue. That's a very tough pill to swallow for many people, because there is still the ego illusion of being a victim to your own experience. But everything that comes to you is your own energy. Nothing is random in the universe. All the actions that you have taken, the things that you have said, the prejudices that you had, have put energy out into the system, basically, into the global system. And those energies have created energy imbalances. And at some point you feel the energy feedback, which you call karma. That means your own energies are being mirrored back to you. Have you been prejudiced? Have you been judging a lot? You suddenly experience judgment. So if you then hate the person who judges you, you're basically hating a part of your own actions that you do not want to investigate. So any type of judgment that ever happens in your life, you're actually judging something that you also do, but your ego pretends to be unconscious of that fact. So it says the judgment is outside of me, the prejudices are outside of me, but that's not true. So then, we can use what I would call the time travel technique as a way of healing trauma. Well, how does that work? Well, usually I would suggest the following thing. You sit down in a comfortable way and you first start the exercise through doing a hyperventilation. So basically for, let's say, 1 or 2 minutes, you're sitting there and you're just doing this. So while you're doing this, you are increasing in energy. That means what is hidden in the subconscious has a harder time staying hidden. Now the next thing that we do is when you close your eyes and you move from hyperventilation into regular breath, you then start visualizing the last situation that you experienced that triggered you. Now, the moment you visualize that situation, try to visualize it as a three-dimensional hologram and think of yourself as a consciousness that can take any angle in the memory, can move around and look at the memory from any perspective possible. So, you create this visualization, and the moment you create that visualization, you will immediately feel the emotional trigger. And the emotional trigger comes because of your ego beliefs. Now, once the emotional trigger comes, that means you feel anger or fear or helplessness, anything that you would label as negative emotion, you will find it in the body. And once you find it in the body, you shift all your awareness into it, and you keep sitting straight, you keep sitting relaxed, you do not create a fight or flight response, you do not harden your body, you allow yourself to feel what is there. Because what you perceive as a negative emotion is simply information why you are out of alignment. Because when you're out of alignment, you suffer. When you're not out of alignment, you don't suffer. So then you feel the emotion, and then you re-experiencing the original trauma that gave spawn to the bias. So for example, it can be that in this 3D visualization, you suddenly experience the moment where someone is violent to you in some way. But when you don't forgive them, when you judge them, when you call them evil, when you call them all kinds of names and all kinds of ideas, you have a deep regret. When you have a deep regret, you cannot heal. You're basically stuck with that karma, and you keep re-experiencing it until you heal it. So therefore, we need to basically relive the experience as this hologram in our mind, feeling the emotion fully, and then we shift perspectives. We look at our own self in the memory that we can look at then from third person perspective. So basically, let's say that's you in the memory, and you look at yourself from outside. And now you try to feel into your younger self and try to feel, what would I have needed at that time? What is it what I didn't get? What would I have needed? Maybe it was understanding, maybe it was love, maybe it was a hug, maybe whatever it is, and give yourself that. Hug yourself, tell yourself what you need to hear, do that. And after you have done that and fulfilled that need, you shift perspective to the perpetrator's perspective. You try to figure out, why are they committing the violence? And when you don't resist it, when you do it deep enough, you will see that they are afraid. So often those who we judge, they are basically expressing a fear that we also carry, but we don't want to see that. So I give you an example. When someone is jealous, for example, what they actually experience is fear of loss. They're not jealous because they want to make your life harder. They are jealous because deep down they don't feel that they're lovable. And therefore they're afraid to be left. And therefore they're being jealous because they try to gain control over the situation to avoid the fear of being left. But of course the jealousy is going to lead to being left, because someone who's jealous is going to be so uncomfortable to live with that, let's say, everything you fear you bring about. That's the nature of it. It's the nature of the energy. So when someone is jealous, for example, they have this deep fear. But to you they appear like a dictator. But in truth it's the fear of loss. So their aggression is actually hidden fear. Now if I can take their perspective, and then I realize, oh, they must have a trauma where they were left behind or ignored or not being taken care of. So because they have the fear of re-experiencing the trauma, they try to prevent it by gaining control forcefully and therefore committing violence. So the moment I understand that, I begin feeling for the perpetrator. This works with all acts of violence. Even those ones you really don't want to name. Like rape, torture, you name it. Whatever it is, whatever, let's say you don't want to name, let's name it here. all of those experiences can be understood. Now, when you look at society, the reason society isn't healing because society does not want to understand. Society wants to be under the illusion we are good, everybody else who does something is evil. We don't want to know it's in us too. The same fear that could spawn such actions is in us, so we don't want to see it. So we condemn the violent criminals. When in truth, they have something deep within them, karmically, a deep, deep-seated fear of not being in control, of being powerless, that makes them want to dominate, that makes them want to take control. Even someone who commits, for example, rape, and I know this is very difficult to talk about because society doesn't want to look at it that way yet, has actually a deep fear of not being able to be intimate with someone. So they try to take it by force because they do not have the confidence of being intimate with someone in a healthy way. So they try to experience some sort of union or state of being free of suffering through pleasure. But because they're out of touch with themselves, they have no empathy or intimacy with themselves. They also have no empathy and intimacy with anyone else. So someone who commits, let's say, an act of hate, hates themselves. It is that simple. Someone who is not self-loving commits acts that are not loving. So, when we can look at traumatic memory in such a way that those beings who commit the crimes are actually not in a loving state because they do not love themselves, because they didn't learn to love themselves, because someone was teaching them not to love themselves. So when we commit violence, we do it because we believe we cannot get our needs met by being authentic, because our authentic self was somewhat violated and rejected too. So this again creates the cycle of understanding. Perpetration creates victims, victims become perpetrators, they create victims, those victims become perpetrators, and so on and so on and so on. Into infinity, except when we start forgiving. And we can only forgive if we take the perspective of the perpetrator and are so compassionate that we understand to them it appeared reasonable even though it was dysfunctional and created suffering. Or at the time where they committed the act, they were unconscious enough and didn't have the knowledge of how to step out of their karma, so to not perpetuate further violence and karma. Now, that's a lot of theory right now that I've given you, but in a practical manner it means again, so let me structure this so you can maybe note it down in your mind or write it down. So what you do first, hyperventilation exercise, visualize the last thing that triggered you. We don't have to go to the more challenging things yet. It can be a neighbor who said something, can be a lady in the supermarket, can be someone that you accidentally hit with a bike and you had an argument over. Think about that situation, visualize it as a three-dimensional construct in your mind with closed eyes in meditation. Watch until the emotion triggers. Then you feel the emotion until you realize what your bias is. Then tell yourself from third-person perspective at the time what you need to hear in order to be at peace. For example, you might need to hear that you're loved, that you're accepted as you are, that as you are, you're fine. You do not need to be in a different way. You do not need to negate yourself. If in that moment you need a hug, give yourself a hug, even though it's just in your mind. Give yourself a hug in your mind. Do that. Then take the perspective of the perpetrator and try to understand why they felt that way. Find out why they were in a state of fear, that they tried to gain control through violence, because that's what it is. Violence is the language of fear. What are they afraid of? Maybe someone you accidentally hit with a bike on a road, right? Because you didn't pay attention. That can happen. That's the human experience. Maybe they usually feel powerless and they have a boss that talks down on them. And finally, they have a chance to talk down on someone else, which they feel in that moment liberates them. But it doesn't, because it creates further suffering. So to see that their attempt at control and their attempt at dominating you or using violence to make you submit to their will is actually them being deeply, deeply fearful. And then you see little injured children in them. Think about a child that beats up other children in school. And when he goes home, his father beats him. That's why he does it. You see, he is simply carrying the perpetrator energy and keeps giving it out. Keeps giving it out because he doesn't know how to transform it. He doesn't know how to transmute it. He feels helpless with that energy inside. And acting it out gives him some sort of relief, some sort of compensation, and some illusion of control. But of course it creates more violence, it creates more trauma, and it makes him even go lower down in energy, and even increase in dark energy. And therefore creating more karma, creating more suffering, attracting more trauma to himself, attracting more suffering to himself. And as long as he will be under the illusion of being a victim, he cannot get out of that energy. Because in order to get out of that energy, we need to claim responsibility for it. You need to begin loving it. You need to begin embracing it, therefore understanding it, and ultimately through loving understanding, changing it. Many don't want to go there yet, but if you subscribe to my channel, I have a sense that you're ready to do that. Yeah? If you get this video, it's not an accident, because nothing in this universe is an accident. You will not have an experience that you're not ready for. Even your mind might tell you otherwise. So then, when you reach complete compassion, that means for yourself and for the perpetrator, you attain, with regards to this situation, oneness and alignment, and therefore the karma is released. The energy frequency of the trauma in you has shifted. Now, since it has shifted, you stop creating it as an experience in the external world. And the more we do this, the more we increase in energy, because those old energies, they start moving, they stop being rigid, they stop being manifested as illnesses. So when they start moving, our energy flow is restored, our frequency increases. Now we become a match to higher and higher experiences. And at some point even of a spiritual nature, of a verifiable spiritual nature. But for that, you cannot get around forgiveness. Everything you do not accept in the world does not mean that anything is wrong with the world in that sense. It means you have a belief about the world where your ego hides. Contemplate about that, my friends. Be well.